And now for a conversation in pursuit of economic justice. Please welcome Temi F. Bennett, Sohrab Kohli and Jennifer Bryant, and Professor Anthony Cook.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Temi F. Bennett. I am co-CEO of IF, a foundation for radical possibility. We are a private racial justice funder here in DC, serving the region. And so before we jump into this panel, because I am really excited about the conversation, I do want to ground us in definition. So this is the economic justice panel. And so I'm going to read a definition from Investopedia on what economic justice is. Economic justice is a component of social justice and welfare economics. It is a set of moral and ethical principles for building economic institutions where the ultimate goal is to create an opportunity for each person to establish a sufficient material foundation upon which to have a dignified, productive, and creative life. Economic justice is the idea that the economy will be more successful if it is fairer, and that prosperity and justice go hand in hand rather than in opposition of one another. The goal is to create opportunities for all to thrive. Universal basic income, income equality by gender and race, equal opportunity for employment and credit, and allowing all to reach their full potential are key tenets of economic justice. So I'm going to ask our panelists to introduce themselves and then tell us how you got into the work of how you got into economic justice space. And then if you do or do not agree with the definition I just gave, or if you have notes, what is your definition of economic justice? We'll start with you, Sohrab.
Hey folks, my name is Sohrab Kohli. I'm a senior manager with the Aspen Institute's Financial Security Program. It's great to be here, humbled by this invite. I'm based in Chicago, so it's very nice to be with folks in DC and to connect with some longtime partners at Kohli. So the definition, I feel like we don't remove anything from that. The way we talk about our work is around security, and security is enabled by having the resources, whether it's personal or through the safety net, to be stable day to day, to be resilient in moments of financial shocks, and then to have those opportunities to invest in yourself and your well-being and your family, your community. What I would add to that definition is not just about building opportunities, but thinking of a reparative lens and, balancing the scales is one of the themes today. And I feel like that is a critical component to when talking about economic justice. And in terms of my personal experience, my first job was part of something called the Independent Foreclosure Review, which was right after the Great Recession, right after the subprime mortgage crisis. I was a independent consultant for the Treasury, looking at mortgages made during that crisis and assessing where borrowers were harmed. It was a very grueling project where we literally flipped through page by page of mortgage documents to see all the ways in which households were charged fees that they shouldn't have been charged, or in many cases, lost homes. And what ended up happening through this review was major bank settlement where flat fee was paid out to households who signed on for this suit. For people who lost their homes, they weren't restored their homes. Or people whose damage was well beyond the flat fee, they didn't receive that money. So it showed me very early on the ways in which our financial system is not set up for the success of everyone. And we often think of home ownership as the pathway to wealth building. But that crisis left so many people in the wake of losing major personal asset and setting them back in their finances. To this day, people have not recovered from losses from the Great Recession. So doing that work prompted me to think about my role in advocating for financial inclusion. I went on to work at a nonprofit in Chicago that is now called the Financial Health Network, thinking of financial inclusion beyond just access to a bank account, but the full suite of products and services that households need. And now I'm with the Aspen Institute, where I've been there for about 4 years. And my current work is around benefits modernization, the public safety net, as well as benefits offered through.
Thanks, Sohrab. Jennifer, do you want to go next?
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Jennifer Bryant. I'm the program manager for the Black Employee Ownership Initiative at Project Equity. We are a national nonprofit that supports businesses converting to employee ownership. We help with technical assistance and financing the transaction and post-transaction TA for the new employee owners. I agree with the definition of economic justice. I would add that a core component is shared ownership, which I'm excited to talk about today. How I got into this work, I've been working in community economic development for 10 years, but my transition into this work really started with a transformative trip to Cuba with the Vincent Amos Brigade. It was the first time that I saw large-scale agricultural co-ops and really got to connect with young Cubans and talk about how cooperatives were a mean of not just, feeding themselves, but also economic resilience and helping them kind of survive the blockade that the U.S. has been waging against them for many, many years. And so it got me really interested in cooperatives. I came back here and started working in the cooperative movement 10 years ago. And I worked with a number of organizations across labor unions and worker centers and local community development financial institutions to help support people start new co-ops and to transition to different forms of broad-based employee ownership, which include work on cooperatives, employee ownership trusts, and employee stock ownership plans. And so really passionate about infusing shared ownership into our economy.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. Hope you're well. My name is Anthony Cooks. I'm a law professor at Georgetown. I'm the founder and director of the Coalition for Racial Equity and Democratic Economy that focuses on community wealth building, incubating community wealth building initiatives to close the racial wealth gap. And I'm also the president and CEO of Gatebridge Community, which serves as an accelerator in this kind of 1-2 punch partnership that we developed between Creed and Gatebridge that takes the incubated initiatives and accelerates them to launch and then scaling them, all focused on community wealth building that centers ownership by community, workers and consumers and producers and residents in communities. Jen, I got to tell you, Temi, that definition rubs me the wrong way.
I bet.
It just rubs me the wrong way. Look, the problem is that so much of what we call community development and community economic development has always been focused on creating opportunity, the process of working and engaging people. This is necessary, but it's insufficient, right? Because in the cracks of opportunity and building bridges through workforce development that lead to no jobs and nowhere, people and communities fall through the cracks on a regular basis, right? I agree with Jennifer that we've got to have an orientation toward changing fundamentally the economy and its engagement with people of color and marginalized folk. We've got to focus on ownership. There's that old saying, you want a person to fish and they eat for a day. Teach them how to fish and they eat for a lifetime, right? And that was the track that so much of community development took. For the longest, we were all about kind of charity-oriented stuff. So it was food banks and food drives and soup kitchens and individualized acts of giving people nourishment or what they needed for a day. That's necessary because when they're hungry, you got to feed them, right? But we soon recognized that all the people who were lined up in the soup kitchen, they kept coming back day after day, right? And we were asking ourselves, right, are we part of the solution here? Are we part of the problem? Are we really dealing with the reasons why these people continue to show up in line trying to get food? So the industry shifted to focus on capacity building, teaching people how to fish, right? But the capacity building soon proved to be inadequate as well, right? Because you can teach people to fish, but what happens when the pond out of which they are fishing is polluted and they can't catch fish? What happens when corporations build dams, right, that starve one part of the pond from fish, so there's no fish to be caught, while there's an abundance of fish on the other side of the dam. What happens when the whole pond is shut down and the operation is moved offshore so that you could get cheap labor to man the farm and you don't have access to any water or fish, right? So we started asking ourselves a question: how do you remedy those kinds of structural and systemic problems that at the same time reaches back to capacity building and reaches back to feeding people and meeting their urgent needs, right? Well, that's community wealth building, right? That is ownership. That is saying to ourselves that we've got to house people, clothe people, medically care for people, increase their health and quality of life in ways that give them ownership over processes, create those possibilities for them, and gives them ownership over the entities and enterprises that are created, right? So what we do, what my work does, is we focus on partnering with communities to build ground-up enterprises and institutions that will be lasting, permanent fixtures in Black and brown communities that will give not Georgetown, not outside investors, not foundations, but the people in those communities ownership of the entities that are created. That is where we are, I think, in the most progressive and radical elements and manifestations of community economic development, and is certainly where my work is anchored.
Well, let's get into this conversation. I'm gonna use first names, okay? Because Sohrab, I'm from Chicago, South Side, so you all right with me? Jennifer is my soror. I am a Hoya lawyer, y'all. So Anthony Cook will always be Professor Cook to me. And he takes me back to, I came out of law school 2009, takes me back to when all the Black students was fighting to get registered for his courses, okay? So Rob, I'm gonna start with you. It is reported that the racial wealth gap in the greater Washington, D.C. region is 81-1, and that data is old, right? So it's probably even more worse. And then in income 3-1. Your program aims for nothing less than more inclusive economy, which would reduce the wealth inequality and have shared prosperity. What does that mean? How do we get there from here?
Yeah, so we have a bold vision of seeing wealth for the bottom half of this country increase by tenfold by 2050. To achieve that, we feel like we need a multifaceted approach. We put out a piece of work last year called the New Wealth Agenda, which lays out 8 different areas for wealth building opportunities. Each of these areas alone won't be the fix, but thinking of broad-based solutions and thinking of building coalitions around these different strategies are key. So I have some notes here just so that I hit on the 8 areas. But the first is around financial stability, supporting measures to increase income. When I mentioned we look at financial security as the day-to-day ability to manage your household, more than 51% of households, more expenses than income, and we need to be seeing increases in minimum wage. We need to see more experimentation with guaranteed income. During the panel in the morning, there's a question from the audience around asset limits and benefit cliffs. Those need to be addressed to ensure stability for households. And then, of course, thinking about creating a more competitive labor market. Wages have been stagnant in this country for decades, but things are only getting more and more expensive. So we're excited to see this work from the FTC around, taking away non-compete agreements, which impact many low-wage workers. Second area of our work is around debt resolution. We heard earlier around the importance of debt forgiveness or debt cancellation, but also thinking about the debt collection processes. These are owned by state civil courts. Over 10 million people a year are sued over debt that is in collection. And in many cases, that debt may be expired. It may not belong to them. But the burden of proof is very imbalanced. It mirrors what we see in eviction courts, where people are often underrepresented by legal attorneys, and something like a $500 or a $50 water bill can turn into a $2,000 fee. And these fees then snowball. They can lead to wage garnishments. So we not only need to be thinking about resolving some of the step, but going to the root and making sure that people aren't put in that position. Our work also spans talking about startup capital for life, the importance of vesting opportunities at birth, making these programs funded, universal, and build in features like automaticity to make sure that people can take advantage of them. Career pathways are critical, equitable homeownership, which includes things like zoning reform, making sure that affordable rentals are available, think of starter homes. So I'm just giving you all a list of types of possibilities there are. There's so many solutions out there, and what we try to do is bring together the insights and evidence, the voices from people who are impacted, and to then activate leaders around these topics. And just so you have my full list of the pillars, we look at retirement savings, the second largest driver of household wealth, thinking of ways to get more people to participate in that system, shared ownership in business and other assets like real estate and commercial real estate. And then lastly, thinking about de-risking wealth and ensuring that in economic downturns that wealth isn't lost and that there's insurance or protections to make sure that people's hard work doesn't go to waste. So happy to chat more about these things, but wanted to lay out how we see the set of solutions being very wide-ranging.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. And I appreciate the current interventions, right? We can do this right now today. And then I'm going to shift. I want to talk, this question is for Jennifer and Professor Cook, because we're talking about inclusive economies. And when I think of an inclusive economy, actually, first let's talk about capitalism. In American capitalism is racialized and built on extraction, particularly from Black folks and people of the global majority. And so in order to succeed here, you have to own it. And at one point they own, right? And it's built on this idea that there are winners and losers, and the owners are always the winners. And when I think of an inclusive economy, I'm thinking of two principles from the Nguzo Saba, Ujima, and Ujamaa, which respectively are collective work and responsibility and cooperative economics. And so I know that both Jennifer and Professor Cook, you guys have models rooted in these principles. Please share with us your models and what makes these more inclusive and less extractive.
Sure, thanks. So Project Equity has been around for 10 years. We have converted dozens of businesses to employee ownership across the country. But my particular program, the Black Employee Ownership Initiative, is looking at how can we increase opportunities for shared ownership for Black workers and Black business owners specifically. And so similar to the Aspen Institute, we started with data. We have a partnership with Morehouse College where we went and spoke with Black business owners to understand what are the barriers and opportunities around employee ownership for Black businesses and Black workers. And we really take a holistic approach. So we do awareness raising activities where we help people better understand the three most common forms of employee ownership. We also talk to business owners a lot about just succession planning in general, how to think about your legacy and what you want to happen to your business after you retire. I think in a lot of small business ecosystems around the country, there are a lot of resources around how to start a business, but not a lot of resources around how to exit a business. And so we kind of insert ourselves there. We then, we do free consultations with business owners to help them understand what their options are. And if they're interested in employee ownership, we do feasibility studies to really dig into their financials and see if it's a good fit for their business. We help them structure the transaction. We have the Employee Ownership Panelist Fund, which helps them finance the transaction. And then we have a program called Thrive after we transition the business to employee ownership, working with the employees to help them manage and run the business and make sure that it's successful for the long term. And so these are things that we offer. We primarily target with the Black Employee Ownership Initiative businesses in 6 cities: Chicago, Los Angeles, St. Paul, Miami, and Atlanta. And we work with local governments to figure out how they can incentivize small businesses and legacy businesses to transition to employee ownership. And so that's how we really are working to support Black businesses. We target businesses that have Black owners and also businesses that have a significant Black workforce, with the goal of community wealth building for both the selling owner and for the employees that are going to take on the business.
So thank you. So what we do is we partner with communities to incubate these social impact community wealth building initiatives. And so we take it through a process as an incubator of growing ideas, gets the wall, doing best practice in research, trying to find models, case studies, that kind of thing, and determining whether or not, particular initiative is something that the community will benefit from. It goes through a process of ideation, validation of the idea is another stage. Then it has to pass a stage to, this is something that we get to secure capital to stand up over a certain period of time. And if so, then we'll move to developing a business plan and a financial model around the idea, right? So that we know exactly what we're dealing with, how much capital it's going to take to function, what kind of personnel are going to have on board, what kind of expertise to support it, what markets are best markets to set the initiative up in. All that kind of stuff is what, Creed does. And so we have incubated with the community our first initiative, Rosie's Grocery. Rosie's Grocery is a worker and consumer-owned cooperative, right? Owned by the workers who work in the business and the consumers who are the residents in the neighborhoods where Rosie's are established, right? And this consumer and worker-owned cooperative is focused on, first of all, delivering fresh and nutritious food to communities that did not have access to that kind of food. There are too many places in America where people call a Mountain Dew and a bag of Cheetos a meal. If that, they miss meals. In DC, we've got what we call food deserts, now called low-income, low-access areas. 82% of these LILA areas where people do not have access to fresh food, 82% of them are in two wards in the city. Ward 7 and 8, right? That did not happen by accident or coincidence, right? That is the accumulated history of this district's relationship to slavery, extracting labor and value from the bodies of people, creating them into certain areas through segregation, from slavery to segregation, to mass incarceration, to rent mining and gentrification. All of this has been systemic and structural over long periods of time. That's why 82% of all of DC's food deserts are located in only 2 wards. There are 4 grocery stores serving 160,000 people in Wards 7 and 8. If we had any semblance of parish around the number of grocery stores in a ward like this, compared to Wards 7 and 8, there will be 14 more stores saying. 14, right? So our business plan, working with our Community Advisory Council, calls for us to prototype 2 stores east of the river. Even with that, we need 12 more stores, right? But we're testing and putting a proposition that with the right community support behind us, with the right expertise, industry and sector expertise, we can bring people together to create for our own communities what other people have refused to do. And we're doing it in a qualitatively different way. Because when you own the thing that is nourishing you, you have more respect for it, more pride in it. You're committed to it much more, right? And so we want Rosie's, this place where people care. The first panel is talking about the ABC, where you get, agency, a sense of belonging, and creating a different contract and community, right? That's exactly what we're doing. By making the community the owners of the thing, we're giving agency. They have agency. They control it. They govern it, right? And at the same time, it creates a place of belonging. Imagine a grocery store that is a place where people feel a sense of belonging, which is a hub for caring, for furtherance of health equity, where the social determinants of health can be engaged and those barriers reduced, where the quality of life can be increased because you're having health and nutrition and counseling there, because you are working with people in community to better their consumption choices and behavior, right? And you're giving them access to options of fresh food they didn't have before. Before, what would they do? And 7-Elevens and convenience stores, that's what plays our community. You walk into those stores, you don't find fresh food. You find a hot dog on a rotisserie grill at best, right? You know, some hot Cheetos, some Mountain Dew, as I said before. You know, that's what you find in those stores. You consume enough of that stuff, and it is going to impact your health, your mental state and well-being, your spirituality, everything, right? There is not by accident that our communities suffer with disparate a disparity with regard to all health outcomes and conditions. Our diabetes rate, hypertension rates, cardiovascular problems, so forth and so on, right? It's no accident that you go from Ward 8 anacostia to Ward 3, you know, a short trip, and you increase your life expectancy by 15 years. These are problems that we have to begin to be, and it did not take place. These problems were not created in a couple of years. This is a long process. So what I tell people is that you got to commit to the long ball here. This is not a sprint, it's a marathon. But you can run a marathon smartly or not smartly. And we got to run this marathon smart, right? And I think that if we can start to do that more and more as a community, then we will begin to impact these issues and to transform these conditions. Every place where a business like this is created, a community-owned business, there are three things that we're attempting to do. The first is to resist an existing system that has conditioned us into complacency, the disease, and vulnerability, right? A neoliberal capitalism that has exploited and extracted from us for generations. We're trying to understand that and to teach people how to resist that. But resistance is not sufficient. You also have to re-envision the possibilities for your life, right? Where are there the third places and spaces where we can communicate and dialogue with each other about what our communities can be, right? It used to happen in the church, not so much anymore. This President is leaving. But it used to happen in schools, but it doesn't happen there anymore. It used to happen in families, but they've been under assault and siege. It doesn't happen there anymore. All of our work has to be to rebuild these third spaces, right? These commons, as some scholars put it, right? Where we can fellowship and collaborate, and we can work together for the collective vision that we can not only have, but we deserve to have. And the third thing is to build, right? We've got to rebuild. Just resisting is to really visioning, and it's also rebuilding, right? And if you can re-envision possibilities through collective effort, then you have a basis for catalyzing rebuild. We want roses and everything that we do to be oases of just that, right? Resistance, re-envisioning, and rebuilding a better future.
After what I hear, structural, systemic, institutional anti-Blackness, right? That's how we got these systems. Talking about 400 years was about me and dying tomorrow. You're talking about deconstruction and construction, imagination, envisioning, and destruction. So I appreciate that. So let's talk about equitable benefits and the inclusive financial system and the work that you guys are doing around those. Susan?
Yeah, it just contrasts with Professor Cook's approach of, I'm inspired by his comments of imagination and rethinking the systems that we have. Our benefits work, unfortunately, I'd say it's trying to fix a broken system or make additions to a broken system, which I acknowledge it's a shortcoming. You think a lot about workplace benefits, and I'll talk about what we're trying to do there, but there needs to be a challenging on this fundamental arrangement where benefits are facilitated through the workplace. We also do work around public benefits modernization, and many of our benefit systems are designed to fail. The policy behind them for programs like SNAP, TANF, WIC There are variants for every state. Each state has a lot of discretion in how these programs are deployed. And in some states, we see intentional failure built in the system. I often think of the example that you saw with unemployment insurance in Florida during the pandemic, where there were lines at the door, there were only so many caseworkers, only 500 unemployment claims to be processed a day. There was essentially no capacity built into allow for the safety net to provide the resilience that should in a moment like that. So our work spans across set the benefit systems. The public benefits work we're doing, there are some folks that people must jump through to just claim benefits that they're entitled to. We are trying to overcome the inherent stigma of use of public benefits, and what we are doing right now is working with leaders of the state benefit programs, trying to be a conduit between state leaders who are trying to take action, trying to reform their programs, as well as the federal government. There are a lot of bottlenecks in how our benefit systems are designed, but one thing is the pandemic did show us where there are opportunities for flexibility. We saw things like some states removing a requirement for an in-person interview for SAP applications. We saw the use of automatic enrollment into Medicaid programs. We saw removal of policies that make people recertify on a regular basis. There is a lot of momentum even from government right now. There's a executive order to improve customer experience with public benefits. The goal is that nobody should be spending more than 20 minutes to apply for the core set of benefits that they deserve and entitled to. So we're trying to work with different states to lift up what some of the best practices are in terms of reducing burden on recipients, but also the burden on caseworkers. There is a major staffing challenge for benefit programs right now, and the fact that it is such a very complicated system hurts the morale of caseworkers, and we see it as the interest of government to not only have a better benefit experience, but the same time money for government expenses. So that's what we're doing in terms of public benefits. In terms of workplace benefits, we want to see more employers offer the core set of benefits that offer financial stability. So access to paid leave, access to quality health insurance, access to retirement savings, and emergency savings. Right now, as I mentioned earlier in my remarks, that retirement is the second largest driver of household wealth. For white families, they have an average of $168,000 in retirement savings. Black families only have $38,000 in retirement savings, and Hispanic families only have $27,000 in retirement savings. The retirement field, folks like to talk a lot about compound interest and having a nest egg will only build over time. But the retirement field often ignores the compound interest of things like wage disparities, occupational segregation, and these things add up in those average balance numbers. So what we're trying to do is push for more universal programs that offer retirement savings. We were advocates for a policy that just went into place last year that will allow employers to match contributions to student loan debt repayment to a retirement account. And one of the biggest things that we are pushing for these days is that emergency savings needs to be coupled with retirement savings, because if when a moment of financial shock happens, sometimes the only option is to withdraw from your retirement savings, take a loan, whereas we feel like there should be equal attention to helping households build a liquid savings account that can help them in both despite the push on. So our goal is to not only see these benefits offered more universally, but to see smart benefit design of automatically enrolling people, automatically escalating those plans so that when more money is on the table, people don't even have to think twice about it in a design for their success. So that's some of the work we're doing across our benefits.
I appreciate that, Sohrab, and I'll have to say, because your practical and current iterations are helpful for me as someone who is always asking myself and my team, what is systems change, and can systems that were rooted and based on anti-Blackness actually be changed, right? And it's an ongoing question that we're asking ourselves, because we haven't seen that structural change the way that we need to see it. And so Jennifer and Professor Cook, y'all are talking about alternative systems, and y'all are talking about building new ones and creating new. And I want to go to, when you talk about these alternative systems, people start saying socialism, it's anti-capitalism, and that's anti-American. And so I'm curious about the cooperative economics design. Black folks have been doing this since time, it is in our language, but here in America it's frowned upon, right? So what have you learned from yesteryear around cooperative economics? What's new for you, and what should people be looking to? Where are some practical examples beyond what you've already shared?
Sure. Well, first I'm going to list up that not only have Black people been cooperatives for a long time, but Black people in DC specifically have been cooperatives for a long time. There's a long and rich history here of cooperative economics, all the way back from Manny Helen Burroughs in the 1930s, who was a cooperative pioneer, to all of the housing cooperatives that formed in the 1970s during another period of economic hardship, to Marion Barry, who had a lot of policies that supported both housing and worker cooperatives. I think that there's so much there around what's already been created in DC. And then there are a lot of contemporary examples of how people are using cooperatives as a resilient strategy to sustain businesses through the pandemic. There are two that I'll highlight, and I shared some resources with the Greater Washington Community Foundation. One is a small business toolkit called Becoming Employee Owned. And there we highlight a Black-owned childcare cooperative called A Child's Place. And there is a really wonderful video about this Black family that owned this childcare center and how they converted it to employee ownership because, one, they wanted the childcare center to stay in the community after they retired from the business, and they wanted their employees to have more say-so in controlling the business, and for the employees to also be able to build wealth from the business that they helped to grow and drive. I think when we talk about cooperatives and, people say socialism or anti-capitalist, one, neither of those things are bad in my mind, but also it's really economic democracy. That's what we're talking about building. We're talking about building an economy where people have a say in the businesses that they are working in, and that they have ownership and the ability to build wealth and not just survive, but thrive from their work. And so that's what we're really building. A Child's Place is one example of that. Another example is Cook's Bakery. This is a bakery in Los Angeles. The owner began to explore employee ownership 5 years into owning the business. I think sometimes we think about employee ownership conversions as something you do when you're retired, but it really can be done at any stage, whether the business is growth stage or if it's a legacy business. And she had 25 employees, and she wanted to make sure that they were able to benefit from the success of the bakery. And so we helped them convert and to a worker-owned cooperative, and they have been growing and thriving since. They took part in our Thrive program, and we've been working very closely with the employees that took over the bakery to help make sure that the bakery is sold continue to be. So we have a number of examples of ownership stories of workers buy their business on our website, which is project-equity.org. And I think that this is something that, already exists, has existed for a long time, and is becoming more popular as people think about, we have private equity snapping up all of these small businesses and a number of industries across the country. And owners are starting to say, when I think about my legacy, private equity isn't a part of that. I want this business not to close as soon as they buy it. I want it to stay in the community, and I want to make sure
that these people that help me build this business, that their jobs are secure. And so we help both owners and employees achieve that.
There's an amazing stat that tells us that if only 30% of the businesses in America were worker-owned, the median wealth of Black families increased from $20,000 to over $100,000. It's an amazing stat, right? The system is this way by design with regard to its extractive, character, with regard to its substandard payment of wages, with regard to locking people into dead-end jobs with creativity without, being able to holistically integrate their sense of vocation and work to their life. It is this way by design. Which is why we got to be very committed and intentional to redesigning a system that has not worked well for us at all. In 1967, the year before he was assassinated, Martin Luther King gave a speech to the SCLC, and he said, "My brothers and sisters, we have been called upon as clergy to feed the 40 million poor people in America. But at a certain point, we've got to ask, why are there 40 million poor people in America?" And when you ask that question, you have to ask questions about the system of capitalism and how it is created that disparity and that problem. And when you begin to ask questions about the nature of capitalism, you're asking yourself, who owns the oil? Who owns the ore? Why do we have to pay for water in a world that's 2/3 water? You begin to ask question about the nature of things, right? One more quote to King, I'll cut this off, right? I love this one because it really shocked me as well. He wrote to Bryant, well, Greta, I am much more socialist than I am capitalist. The system of capitalism had good intentions at first, but it quickly became the very thing that it opposed. And so I believe that capitalism has outlived its usefulness. This is Martin Luther King Jr. not writing in 1967 toward the end of his career, not writing in 1963 when in Washington he delivered that "I have a dream" speech, which is all we hear on a constant leak, right? You know when he wrote this? He wrote this in 1953, the year before he married Coretta, 2 years before he came into leadership of the Montgomery bus boycott, right? What I'm trying to say is that don't let this society that condemns socialism and so forth fool you into believing it, right? That is the way things should be. Because the truth of the matter is that socialism has been great for rich people. The prison industrial complex is a socialist system for the wealthy. The military industrial complex is a socialist system for the wealthy. You don't think that 3 people in America who own more wealth than the bottom half of the entire population of this country got there by pulling themselves up by their bootstraps, do you? No, they got there through our tax dollars that researched and created all kinds of intellectual property that they were able to appropriate and privatize for their own benefit. That's how they got there. They're just 10 people on the face of the earth own more wealth than half of the population of the world. It ain't no coincidence. All of them are white men, right? I'm not saying the answer is for Beyonce and Jay-Z to be part of that group, because that ain't the answer. That ain't what I'm saying, right? I'm just saying it's not a coincidence, right? So look, we have got to understand we have to define the terms on which we engage this problem and not be kowtowed into submission by those who are doing the very thing that they're accusing us of and having done it extraordinarily well. Zero D best.
Absolutely, and I just looked up also, like, there's a speech, I don't know if people are familiar about MLK, a few months before he was assassinated, and he talks about how affirmative action in this country was always white, right? It started white. And at the end of that speech, she says, we're coming to Washington to get our check. And so we went out on a pause here before we get to a final thought and open it up for some Q&A.
So, taking advantage of all your different expertise, right, from the research, policy, from education, from boots on the ground work, how do you see those different sectors coming together and maybe sustainable change in this specific region, and potentially even working with the foundation, right? Because we are all doing really good work in the area. So what's the collaboration between different sectors that you see happening?
I'll say Project Equity recently spoke at an event that the Aspen Institute had. We work very closely with them and other research institutes and academic organizations. I mentioned earlier we have a partnership with Morehouse College to really ground the work that we're doing in data first. We look at a lot at the census data around Black workforce density to figure out where to even focus our work. So everything is grounded in data, and we wanted to understand specifically with our work at Morehouse, why aren't there more Black-owned employee-owned businesses? So what are the specific barriers that exist, and how can we address them? And I think that when we're talking about solutions, the solutions often need to be targeted in a certain way, and to understand how they should be targeted, you have to actually speak to folks. And so we've been doing qualitative interviews with Black business owners in Atlanta and other cities to really understand what are the needs, what are the barriers, and how can we design programs around them to meet your needs. And so I think that we work very closely with research institutes and with academic organizations, institutions, to figure out how to ground our work in data.
I'll just add that, we work with a lot of funders who want to see scaled solutions to these issues quickly, but experiments have to happen locally, and I often push against those funders and say, if you want to think about scaling, you have to think about place first. So these types of innovations and opportunities are the types of things that, as a think tank, we like to put a spotlight on to show what's possible. So really appreciate the work that must be happening on the ground to inspire what could lead to some of the bigger changes we want to see.
I'll just say quickly, you got to be cross-sector by design. Gatebridge, for instance, is very much focused on bottom-up approaches to these issues. And so the board has to reflect that. And so our board reflects that. Majority DC residents, most of them East of the River residents. We have sector expertise on the board, yes, but it's very important that you have a multi-sector representation with regard to governance and the envision of and execution of what you're doing.
Good afternoon, stop at this thank you guys for your discussion. Always admire the work you've done, Jennifer. And, Professor Cook, we always do the job, so I appreciate you. And thank you for the work around supporting Wardy CBD. Appreciate it. The question I have is, we talk a lot about the systems, and we talk about a lot about the agencies that do the work. What would you see as the challenges for the community itself, the residents, moving from poverty to wealth building, to psychological challenges it takes to, after generations of poverty, beginning to see yourself more as a producer as opposed to a consumer. So you can talk a little bit about the work that needs to be done there to position the residents to embrace your wealth building, as I said.
Thank you for that question. That's incredibly important. To cast no aspersion, this is an old comment from the day in Black communities, that the problem with our ability to create solidarity economy is that psychologically, white supremacy has done a job on us as well. And we believe that the white man's ice is colder, his sugar is sweeter, and that everything that is already in existence is the best that it can be for us, right? And so this is a mentality that you encounter, which is one of the reasons why we wade into this ecosystem building at the end of being able to show, to manifest something tangible with regard to what is possible, right? I'm in the academy, I'm a professor, I do this a million different ways. Conferences, uplines, supply chains, things that people didn't see, that what the things, right? But we very intentionally decided to weigh into the space where we are convinced that within a fairly short period of time, with the right capital backing, that you can create something tangible, that people could come into this grocery store, that they can feel its culture, that they can see what is possible in their lives and in their communities. And so for those that are part of the Doubting Thomas complex, that are still assimilated into a culture and understanding of white supremacy that limits our possibility, the proof is in the pudding, right? It becomes very difficult to refute that you are living for the steam, feel, to touch it and experience it, right? So for my part, I think with Sohrab and others, we've got to do more of that, right? We've got to make it clear, create some tangible evidence that what we envision is possible.
One, there's a lot of lead time to get a cooperative off the ground, whether it's a startup or a conversion. I mentioned Proof Bakery. They approached us in 2019. The conversion was completed in 2021. So that's, 2 years of work to do that. And when you are a working class person, you don't have 2 years a lot of the time. And so I think that that's been one of the major challenges for people who are interested in doing this model. And prior to working at a national organization, I was working in Ward 8. I'm a Ward 7 homeowner. And I think that I saw people that were really passionate about addressing issues around food deserts, et cetera, trying to start food cooperatives. And just the time that it takes, the money that it takes, connecting to the resources that you need, and then having 2 years to get it off the ground, those are real practical challenges, I think, for folks. And they're not insurmountable, but I think when we're designing programming and when foundations and other nonprofits are thinking about supporting employee ownership, you have to take all of those things into consideration.
And so much of what you have said resonated. So I'm gonna I'm seeking your perspective. So I'm Libby Grady with the Latin American Youth Center. Our youth depend on us, right? And oftentimes as we're funded, I'm in the nonprofit sector, right? Like pretty much progress wants to be seen, like you said, at the switch on and off. But then yet we have our young people, like currently, there's crime in our streets, there's mental health, there's substance abuse, there's homelessness, all of these things. How are we supposed to treat our young people as a whole? What communication, or how do we go beyond? Because we're talking about economic mobility, we should get beyond if the basic needs we all know that aren't being met. It's that kind of sometimes, or a lot of times, there's a disconnect from what's going on the ground to a lot of these pieces. So I love what you have said about, the capacity piece. But sometimes in our space, we can't really get to the capacity due to the debate and constant challenging, who has the power dynamics and trying to get them to understand the issues that happen in that community every day. So I wanted to hear your perspective about how do we go beyond that and not just seeing things and find some pieces, because you treat our young people as a whole person. Like we just don't do pieces. And we find ourselves in this constant struggle trying to address the issues. And frankly, I'm concerned about our sector as nonprofits far worn out. They not sick. Pandemic, people would have had time to say shit of the urgency. We could make things happen. Money could come out of nowhere. We could let this happen. As after pandemic, we're seeing the challenges the demands have increased. And those of us kind of left to sort of address these issues. It's like, who's with me? And that's how a lot of leaders are doing at this point. So I'm just really interested in your perspective with policies, the research, the demands, and the other piece, I would like you to talk about or put an interesting period of perspective together. In my research, I have 4 generations: millennials, Gen Z, boomers, X. So, everyone to say who's wrong, who's right, and who deals with whatever. At the end of the day, we're all going to have to figure out this because I'm employed beginning. And I say young people because at the end of the day, we're the ones that have to figure out this. Already have felt a lot of assistance for them. So how do we go beyond this? Just like to say your perspective.
Yeah, and I wanna, because we're at time, so in your answer, can you wrap up a final thoughts on economic justice that you want this audience to know? Your question kind of based around intergenerational collaboration and how do we support that and advance that, right? In a way of collective. Yes, and I'm thinking about this is anything about every day that I say. Absolutely.
Well, that's a big question and a very important one, and I don't have the full answer for that. All I know is that the intergenerational piece has to be in part accomplished through valuing the generation and young people, and as alluded to earlier in the first round, of incorporating them into the process of designing and implementing the visions that we have for the future. Have to be very and they bring a certain perspective, a certain energy that is extraordinarily important for those of us who are, more mature. But as far as that is concerned. But also, the process of engagement and doing this work has to be one that is rooted in a sense of joy and happiness, right? We need to laugh more. We need to dance more. We need to sing more, right? I often do community meetings where, we come in and we're dancing. That's the first thing we're doing, right? Because people just need to feel a greater sense of belonging and joy in what they do. And music is often a way of connecting across generations and across cultures, right? So stuff like that is important as well. But the other piece is that we can do all of that if we do not figure out a way creating the capital that can advance the best of our work. This work is still destined to just be moving shapers onto the Titanic, right? And for the community foundation, if some other foundations are moving in this direction, that's what they are doing, much more substantive engagement with regard to funding these initiatives sustainably. But we've got to, I think, shape what's happening here today and use it as a springboard for educating other foundations and funders in the public sector about the importance of funding this work for sustainability and for the long run.
I really love the question around intergenerational collaboration. I spend a lot of time talking with business owners who are thinking about retirement, thinking about their legacy, what they want that legacy to be, not just for their business, but also for the neighborhood that they're in, for their employees, for their community. And I think that, a lot of times when people are thinking about selling their business and to their employees, it's about more than money. It's about the fact that they want the business to remain rooted in the community that it's in. They want it to remain as a resource. They want it to remain as a place where, people can have high quality jobs. And I think that that's something that we should be thinking about more broadly. I love, Native American communities talk about, when they're thinking about the future, 7 generations. So it's not just like, what do I want from my business now, but what do I want from my community long after I'm gone? And I think that those are the types of questions that I find very juicy and beautiful to think about.
Well, just did what my fellow panelists said. I totally agree with it. I think I'll just stick with me for a while, because when you think about our work, it's about the intergenerational care needs. It's about when you see loans and withdrawals being taken out. It's to address issues with elders or children. So I think it's a very important piece for us to think about.
Thank you all for attending.